Hey everybody, welcome back to the Headway Podcast. I'm Shane, your host, and joining me is co-host Rachel.
Hey everyone, today's episode is a deep dive into the world of advocacy, where voices are amplified and change is ignited for a more inclusive society.
We're honoured to be joined by three guests.
Hiya, my name is Fiona and I had a stroke in 2019 and I have been getting help from the Irish Heart Foundation and from Headway since I was discharged from the NRH.
My name's Seamus. I have a carcinoma, which is a kind of abnormal cluster of blood cells on the brain stem in my case, and I've been at Headway for 2 years now.
Hi, my name is Sharon. I had a stroke in December 2020 and I have been with Headway since 2022, and I'm also linked in with the Irish Heart Foundation.
Let's embark on this discussion about advocacy and its pivotal role in shaping a brighter future for all.
Advocacy, apart from being difficult to pronounce, and we've all had trouble wrapping our tongue around it, is, you know, making the case, I suppose, for whatever it is, whatever aspect of, in my case, it's kind of the rare disease of a carcinoma, but it comes in a lot of different shapes and forms. So it's making the case for people who are suffering in various respects, whether it's to government, to employers, and so on. I think Fiona has a good definition there that we sort of looked up, so I'll hand it over to her.
Yeah, it says here, advocacy means getting support from another person to help you express your views and wishes and help you stand up for your rights. Someone who helps you in this way is called your advocate. So I suppose you could be an advocate for somebody else, or you could be an advocate for yourself.
Yeah. Or, as is the case with Headway, I think Headway is kind of an advocate on behalf of all the clients, you know. Yeah, for all of us, exactly. Where I'm going to start, I suppose, is in relation to carcinoma. So I'm a member of Carcinoma Ireland, which is a pretty small group, truth be told, but it's for people with carcinoma. And we're in the process of organising to, you know, it's a community organisation, but it's gone from being a sort of meet-up, a once-a-month meet-up, to a situation where we're having proper meetings and we're trying to get organised with a view to advocating on behalf of people with carcinoma, whether that's in the context of Rare Disease Ireland, or, you know, as I said, probably the most common way that people think of it is in relation to government and legislation, and that will be something that we're looking at there as well. So, you know, it's something I think we're going to have to learn quite a lot about along the way. We have an idea of what to do and how it works, but it's, you know, I think like anything, it's the doing of it is where you kind of learn more about what advocation is and or advocacy is, what may or may not work on your behalf, you know.
Yeah, it's quite daunting because it's such a big topic. You don't know, are you advocating for services, advocating for funding, advocating for courses, advocating for modifications in your home? There's just so much involved.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think where where a lot of it starts is with funding, because most groups feel that they're underfunded, so that's kind of what they're advocating for, is to kind of where they can look, whether it's to government or to kind of local councils in our case, you know, to get grants that can be used, you know, in terms of kind of putting information out there, I suppose, is what we're looking at to kind of make people more aware of the condition as well, and those kind of things. But, you know, that's one end of the spectrum. I suppose, like, probably more pronounced is getting funding to people who need the money in terms of their day-to-day life. You know?
I suppose that's a problem. People with brain injuries or people who have gone through an illness probably aren't working full-time.
Exactly.
So they're not able to pay for the service that they really need to get better. So that's why I suppose we have to look to a lot of charities for help.
Yeah.
And because they're not paying for the services, then they're looking for funding from government or from councils or from maybe big corporations to try and help get the services. So it's not like we can afford to pay for the service because we already still have to pay all our other things like mortgage or rent or insurance or any kind of medical appointment that we still have. And that's on top of bills and food and that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of the group that I'm part of, it's just because it's such a small group, it has very little kind of traction anyway, you know.
Yeah.
So that's why the organisation is important. And like, you will get a reaction from people, I think, when you explain to them what it is. And, you know, before we were on air or being recorded, I think the point was being made about when it's somebody who suffers from a condition making that point, it's a little bit more forceful.
Yeah.
And they're more likely to get, you know, get funding or get whatever the reaction is that they're looking for. So it's important in a sense. You need two types of advocate, if you like. You need the person who's able to do it for themselves, who's been through something, whether it's a stroke, whether it's a cavanoma, but whatever kind of brain injury it is. But also, and probably more importantly, when it comes to children, you need somebody who can advocate on behalf of the person who's suffering, you know. Yeah. And I know, say with the cavanoma, I know, like, there's people who come to the coffee meetups who are there because they have kids who are afflicted with that, and like that's that's something like what they're going through is something completely different. Like for me, you know, I have to deal with this, but I'm capable of dealing with it. But a child, like, and a parent having to deal with it on their behalf is a different thing altogether, you know. And I think that's another form of advocacy, if you like, where it's a parent who's kind of looking for whether it's attention or funding or whatever it is on behalf of.
And I suppose that's the thing, like, advocacy doesn't have to be going into Dáil Éireann or going to your local TD. It's just making other people aware. Just if you feel that that's too daunting for you, just talking to somebody that you think may get support or being able to give support. Like, for you to be able to tell your journey or tell your story, which is kind of giving peer support to somebody else who's maybe further behind on their recovery journey.
That's where I come in on advocacy, because like you're saying there, Fiona, the going into the Dáil side of things, that's what scares me when I hear the word advocacy, and that's where I shy away. So like that, telling my story or sharing my experience with other people who have brain injuries, or in my case, other people that have had strokes, that's where I help out as much as I can with the advocacy side of things, because I myself have never been political and politics scare me. So that side of things definitely aren't for me. But that the other side of advocacy, that's my side. But yeah, it's not the same for everyone. But that's where you're saying, Seamus, that we need different types of advocacies. Advocates.
I think it's a really good point though that you're making, because in one way, advocacy could be like, you could be on a hospital board and you could be incapable of speaking up for yourself, and somebody else on the ward might do it for you and call the nurse over or whatever.
And just
it is.
be like, oh, they want to go to the toilet.
Completely.
Something as simple as that.
That's advocacy.
Yeah.
To me, that's as much advocacy as the other end of the spectrum, going to a meeting in Dáil Éireann or whatever it is and looking for money, looking for funding for your cause. You know, like I think it's a wide spectrum. The same as what people are suffering from is a wide spectrum, you know. But yeah, to go back to my original point, I think in one way that's the most important. It could be a complete stranger in a hospital board speaking up for you, and when you're not capable of it, and that could be so important when it happens, you know.
Absolutely.
So don't put yourself down because you don't want to deal with the political side of it. I think a lot of people are like that, and they're like, that shouldn't be expected of anybody, you know. I don't think it should anyway. We're lucky, like in the Cavanoma group, there's one woman whose name I won't say, but she's very like she's been dealing with it for a long time, so she's very up and at 'em about it, you know. And she will go and kind of do whatever needs to be done. So the political side of it is, at this stage anyway, it's down to her, you know. And it's good, I suppose, when you're in that situation, it's very good to have somebody that you think is capable in that way. But like, it's not the be all and end all of things, because equally what she does, like, I remember when I came out of hospital, and it was probably like, I don't know, 6 months later before I even thought, oh, you know, I should go and see if there, you know, what I can do, or what groups I should join, or where I can find out more. And so I went to the UK first of all, because they had a website that was up online, and that kind of gave out a certain amount of information. It was quite organised, and they were advocating on behalf of people with carcinoma in the UK. But they came back to me and went, well, you know, there's carcinoma Ireland. So I went, oh, no, we didn't. They gave me the address of the woman. I dropped the mail, and she was going, yeah, we do once a month meet up. And that meet up and the information that was there that was more basic, you know, but like, that mattered hugely at that stage of my recovery, that I was listening to other people who were further down the road, who'd been through probably, you know, more extremes than I had. But just listening to them was like, you know, and hearing that's their stories, that kind of put me a little bit. It took a long time, but it put me back on my feet a little bit. And that was massively important. In terms of the advocacy, I would say that was kind of more like what I'm talking about in relation to being on a hospital board and somebody speaking up for you on your behalf, like having people to interact with and kind of to talk to you who've been through it. You know, that was a form of advocacy, I would say, like that. I was kind of in a wilderness until I had that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose even in hospital, sometimes you can think, oh, the doctor has gone to college for 17 million years and I've only gone to college for 3 years, and they know everything about the subject, whereas you know your own body, you know what you were like before you had the brain injury, or before you had the stroke, or before whatever. So when you're trying to figure out what you need to get back to, it's very important for you to advocate for yourself, because they're going off where you are now and they're trying to give you goals of what they think that you'd be capable of achieving, whereas it's a personal journey, I suppose, and everybody's wants and needs are different, and everybody's goals are going to be different. So it couldn't be your consultant, it could be like your occupational therapist, your speech and language therapist, your vocational therapist. They're all trying to do what's best for you, but I suppose you and your family know you the best. So that's kind of where you need to kind of start self-advocating for yourself. And then, like you said, reach out to groups like Headway or like the Irish Heart Foundation. I know the Irish Heart Foundation have started a Patients Championship program where patients can get training on advocacy and stuff. Or if you have to go to the Dáil or whatever, like I spoke at the Disability Awareness Committee a few years ago, and that was to try and get more funding and just to make the TDs and senators more aware of what life is like for people who are living with a disability. Because unless you're friends with someone, or unless you're living with someone who has a disability, it's very hard to kind of imagine. And it's great when everyone's going and giving out figures of left, right and centre, but until you listen to somebody's personal journey and their struggles and their story, you can't really understand it properly.
Yeah, I think what probably makes an impact in that sense is the employment side of it, which you mentioned earlier on, where somebody has gone from, you know, say full employment to not being able to work. Because like with a brain injury, like this was something that we spoke about on previous podcasts, I think. The thing about a brain injury is you can't see it. There's nothing to show people.
Yeah.
Nobody can look at you and go,
It's invisible.
yeah, it's invisible. So where the point is probably well made is in terms of employment. You know, if you're saying to somebody, whether it's in a group, in government, you know, at a kind of support mechanism or organisation, that you've had to stop working and that you're not really capable of doing what you were doing, that kind of makes the point, like on behalf of what's happened to you, you know. And I think people, hopefully, in government or people behind funding, will that will have the impact on them that kind of you need to have on them, you know. If you're looking to, you know, if you're looking for money or you're looking for whatever kind of, you know, legislation or support in that way, that if you can explain how much your life has changed, and probably, you know, key to that is the fact that you've gone from being a working body to not being able to do, that will make the point.
And even things like if the waiting list to get speech and language therapy or to get physiotherapy are so long, it means you're off work for so much longer than you should be. So if there were more resources or more physiotherapists or more services there, you wouldn't, or people wouldn't be taking up these supports for as long as they need to in order to recover, to get back to work. You'd actually be back and paying taxes sooner rather than being in social welfare.
Yeah.
So I know it in the long run, or in the short term, you have to put more funding in initially, but it means in the long term you're saving money.
You know, it's like a lot of things. You will save money, and it's just better to kind of deal with things at root rather than go away and you know, oh, we funded that, so is that not enough? No, it's not.
No, because people are getting injured every single day.
Yeah,
it's not just once a year.
Yeah. I mean, you both mentioned the Irish Heart Foundation, is it?
Mm-hmm.
So would you say, like, they do a lot on behalf of people from a advocacy point of view, like that they're out there kind of spreading the word or doing what needs to be done in that sense?
I would think so from a user point of view. I think this is an interesting question because I think myself and Fiona would look at this differently, as she is on the advocacy team, whereas I wouldn't be. So I think it's an interesting question on that side of things. So from my perspective, on that outside looking in, I would say yes. So it would be interesting from you as kind of being part of the advocacy team, what your
how
view would
effective
be.
you think it is.
I'm very effective. Well, I think one of the first things the Irish Heart Foundation was, it was very difficult to find. Not that we didn't realise that they supported stroke survivors.
Absolutely,
They're
I
called the
agree.
Irish
Yeah.
Heart Foundation.
That's that was what occurred to me when you both mentioned it. I wouldn't have thought that was somewhere you go if you've had a stroke.
Yeah, and a lot of us have all said that. And to be fair, they've now changed. It's still called the Irish Heart Foundation, but they now have a tagline saying supporting people with heart disease and stroke survivors or something. So they have taken that into account, in fairness to them. And I think now once you Google stroke survivor or something, it does come up
on the Google search.
Yeah, and to be fair to them, they also take into account what people say, take into account people's feedback. Like we were saying, for people with brain injury, it can be very difficult sometimes to navigate different parts of the website. So they're changing their website to try and make it easier. So they do genuinely take on board what people say. And I suppose they're good at seeing where people come from, like say, I'm not back to work, but I was a teacher, and Sharon's not back to work, but you were marketing. And they're kind of saying, okay, well, maybe you might be interested in doing X, Y, and Z. So like I've spoken at a few conferences because I don't mind speaking. It's not my number one favorite thing to do, but I don't mind telling my story. I don't mind speaking in front of people.
Well, you're articulate, and that's probably why.
Whereas other people might be like, Jesus, absolutely not. That's not something I want to do.
Yeah.
But then I know by telling my story, it'll help other stroke survivors on their journey, or other people in general on their journey. And I suppose recently there was a conference in Ireland about a month ago, was it? A European stroke conference, life after stroke.
About 3 weeks ago.
And it was all different foundations from across Europe who are trying to support stroke survivors. But a lot of them support older stroke survivors. They don't have younger stroke survivor support network. So they were trying to get ideas and talk to people about what they needed to set up to kind of give more support for younger stroke survivors. So that's what I was talking about. And then another lady who works for the Irish Heart Foundation was talking about all the different services they provide. So I think it was like a twofold, one person talking about the services and support, on one person talking about their personal journey and what they needed and how I've been impacted, I suppose, from their support.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I know Headway is has an advocacy group as well. It's not something I'm part of, but I've listened to other people at the social group who do go to the advocacy meetings, It's something I'd like to know more about. I suppose I don't feel that qualified to talk about it, because I haven't attended the meetings, and what I know is just based on a certain amount of hearsay from talking to people, as I say, at the social groups. But you would hope that there's a little bit more of an obvious correlation than with the heart and the stroke situation, that that you have Headway representing people who have brain injuries.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So whether that's that's the government, to society in general, these podcasts I think are probably a bit more on a global scale, trying to get word out about what people go through, how they deal with it, so that there's a greater understanding amongst people in general then who haven't had to deal with brain injuries or aren't necessarily connected to somebody who is, that there'll be a greater kind of understanding out there amongst people. At least I hope, I think that's what it's about.
Yeah, and I suppose that's a good point when you said you haven't kind of, I want to say, researched maybe into the different kind of advocacy that Headway do. So there's no harm in people sending an email and say, just wondering what's the meeting about, or next time you're in Headway, just asking for a bit more information. And it could just be turning up in a meeting and chatting to other people and finding out, and it could be for you, it might not be for you. And it might be something as little as emailing your TD, just saying, can you just keep us in mind if there's something coming forward, or talking to somebody who's had a brain injury to say, oh, Headway supports people with brain injuries. Like we were saying earlier, it doesn't have to be this massive thing. It can just be making people aware that services are available, or, I don't know, trying to raise money in order to allow the services to continue for somebody else.
I think it would probably be a good thing for a little bit more of a link back to, say, what I know anyway is the social group, so that people were a kind of counterbalance to what you're saying. I think it is good if you can kind of encourage people to go and find out more for themselves, but you probably need to bring them towards it as well, so that there's a little bit more of a flow of information going back to people as to what's been done on their behalf, to what the advocacy might be, what we're trying to do, what funding we're trying to get, funnily, I get asked about this. I get asked when I go into the social group. I don't know if you've had that, Sharon, but I've been asked, what is the podcast? Obviously it's at an early stage where we're still recording here, so it's not out there. People can't check it out, but there's definitely interest, and a certain amount of, I suppose, is born from that mystery that's around it, you know. So I think with the advocacy, it's probably something similar, that if you're not doing it, you mightn't really know about it, you know?
Agree, absolutely. You know how I said earlier in the podcast that when I think of advocacy, I think of, maybe it's because I have a background in marketing, possibly, but when I think of advocacy, it's the shiny side of it and the preppy side of it. It's kind of like, oh, I'll tell you my story, or I'll write a blog about it, or I just want to do the fundraising nice side of it, but I don't want to do anything with politicals or the legislation or any of those things.
Yeah, but I think if we're saying anything here, you can't have one without the other.
No, I know, but that's what I'm asking.
So you're really, what you do is really important, because
that's your interest.
But what I'm asking, Seamus, sorry, when people ask you what the podcast is about, I could similarly, when you say you're in an advocacy group, or if you're in an advocacy group, I'd say, yeah, but what is it? Because I know what my shiny, pretty side is, but what do you guys do?
Yeah.
And I think part of that is, if you've had a brain injury, some of it is you've lost your ability maybe to speak properly or to communicate effectively, or a big thing is you've lost confidence within yourself. So it's baby steps to try and get into these things. So doing a podcast or advocating for something might be too big a step for some people.
Absolutely.
Whereas in a year's time, they might be the ones sitting here instead of us, which would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a point well made that, you know, particularly where people aren't, like, their speech has been affected. So never, like, the confidence, for sure. Yeah. But even if they were confident, they may not be able to make the point. Verbalize it, exactly. So what they need is somebody who'll kind of speak up on their behalf, Absolutely. You know, whether, you know, in relation to whatever it is, whether it's money, information, whatever. But, like, they're not capable of saying what they're feeling.
Yeah. So, I think as well, and I think could be similar as well with advocacy and the brain injury side of things, reading and that kind of, I can't think of the word now, sorry. I suppose the whole speech and cognitive side of things, words like legislation and politics, that kind of stuff, it can be very wordy and very overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And I think, similar to what you're saying, I think part of the recovery of a brain injury, I can't get my word across, you know, here's a good example of a brain injury. You know what I mean, though?
If you're learning how to eat, or if you're really learning how to walk, your number one priority is not going to be going to Dáil Éireann to do X, Y, and Z. Yeah. Like, you're too focused on trying to get back to
day to day.
Yeah.
I think I just gave a good example of what I meant.
Well, what it made me think of is, personally, I would say my attention isn't what, like, now it's not what it was. Like, so I can look at something, but I'll get like, right, I've got to put that down now. So when it comes to legislation, and you know how kind of prosaic these things can be, like it's hard. Yeah, but it's hard for somebody who's never had a brain injury, I think.
Absolutely.
It can be very difficult to engage fully with you know, that kind of, like, wording and reading what's been written in relation to legislation, or even in relation to funding. So if you have had a brain injury, well, then the chances are the challenge is going to be even greater.
But then I suppose that's also where we need to stick to our own lane. If we only have to go in and talk about our personal journey, that's great. We're not lawyers, or we're not politicians, so they can worry about that, and we'll just tell things from our point of view. Yeah,
but that's also why it's good to have somebody, like, to have something like Headway.
Exactly, yeah.
That will work on your behalf, because you're hoping that, well, there's other people there who are making the case, who may be a little bit more able to sit down and stick their head into whatever needs to be engaged with, and kind of see it through, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
As we wrap up this insightful discussion, let's hear a final word from each of our guests.
I think it's important to remember that people find it very difficult to advocate for themselves, that people find it a lot easier to advocate for other people. So it's really important to ask for help. If you feel that you weren't able to do something for yourself, ask someone for help. I remember initially I had to fill in loads of forms, and I wasn't able to read properly, and I wasn't able to write. So my friend sat down with me for a couple of hours, and she wrote everything out. And that was great, because it meant she was able to explain things when I couldn't think of words properly. She felt that she was actually doing something for me. And I think sometimes it's quite a lonely journey, so people think that they can't do anything, whereas this was actually a huge help to me. And I also find, if I'm making phone calls, if I feel it's going to be a difficult phone call, I start the phone call saying, I've had a stroke, so I might need to ask the question. I might need you to ask the question differently, or I might be repeating myself and I won't realise. So it's just those small things that you are self-advocating, but the person on the other end of the phone is being kind of more mindful of the language they're using. And it's really important to avail of the service and support that are out there. Things like citizens' advice or citizens' information are there to help us. If we don't know something about the subject, that's the purpose of them being there. And then if you do want to advocate for others, or if you do want to get into advocacy, start small, even just to find out what services are out there, what they need help with. It could be leaflet drops, it could be something even as small as just talking to your neighbour about something, or joining patient panels to give the HSC a different viewpoint, or speaking to people about your personal journeys. Everyone is actually really interested, but people don't want to be nosy either, so it's trying to find a happy medium.
God, don't know how to follow that. That made a lot of sense.
I wrote everything down.
I wrote nothing down, so I'm just flying on the seat of my pants. As I said earlier, I think it can range from hospital to being part of an organisation that goes to government. But what was important for me, I suppose, was first of all counselling, which I wouldn't have gone near, and I really, it took me quite a while, but eventually I did do it, and it was in two parts. I got some counselling in the rehabilitation hospital, but then through Headway was the second stage of the counselling, and that was in the CFT group, where I felt I had an advocate. I had somebody who was bringing information to me that I just didn't know about, you know.
It's creating awareness.
Completely.
Yeah.
So in that case, the person who was... It was brilliant, to hear other people's stories, but it was also the person who was acting as the advocate in terms of kind of bringing information about meditation, about the brain, and kind of helping everybody. But obviously you're interested in yourself, so helping me understand what it was that I'd gone through and was going through. And that's a form of advocacy as well, that, gathering information and presenting it to somebody that isn't going to know and isn't going to have that information otherwise, it is hugely important. And that's what, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't been there, if you know what I mean. There's no way. That was how I got involved with Headway, and that kind of led to whether it was, the cookery, the allotment, the social group, the podcast. So it was a winding road, but now I feel in a strange sort of way, I'm advocating on behalf of other people who I don't even know.
Yeah. It's full circle. I suppose as well, sometimes in counselling, they show you how far you've come when you don't realise that yourself, because people can be very difficult or very hard on themselves. So it's nice for people to see how far they've come.
The CFT group was the C was compassion. So it was compassion for yourself, I suppose, which links to the point you're making, I think. And you are you're quite hard on yourself anyway. I think that's just your natural, that's your personality, your natural character. So we probably need these things irrespective of being injured.
Yeah.
But it's more important when you do go through an injury that you have an advocate and that you have somebody who's acting on your behalf,
That was targeted at me. Being hard on myself, just for the listeners.
I forget we're not being recorded. So people can't see that I'm looking at you when I'm making the point.
So I was going to say that one of the things that was important to me was actually other brain injury survivors or patients who actually advocated to me, or they basically taught me to advocate for myself when I met them through the different services such as Headway and the Irish Heart Foundation. So it would have been in the early stages of my recovery when I was waiting for my speech therapist and waiting for occupation therapy as well. And they basically taught me, I guess, how to stand up for myself and how to get the supports that I needed, who I needed to call, who I needed to contact. Yeah, they taught me to advocate for myself. And that's why I wanted to get into advocacy, because I want to pass that forward. And like some of the guys mentioned, I wanted to go full circle.
I remember you, the first social group that you were at.
Me?
Yeah. So, like, it's a great thing. Like, I was kind of thinking then about myself when I saw you. Like, it's a great thing to watch somebody go from being kind of a little bit, oh, what's this? Why am I here? Like, I'm not sure of myself, to where they're, they've told their story, that they kind of confidence, like, I see you now, and it's like, God, you're a different person. Oh, it's the same person. I shouldn't say different, because it's the same person.
It's been growth.
Yeah, just a lot happier in their skin, a lot more, because it's scary, it's scary going through these things.
I mentioned that in my last chat when I first came along to the social groups in Headway, that I was really kind of uncomfortable in my own skin, and that the course in Headway really brought back my confidence. And I like that too.
Yeah, I think a lot
of people in the groups have taught me to advocate for myself and to stand up for myself again. And actually Fiona very much taught me to advocate for myself.
But I think that's a very good point, because when you said earlier about having to make a phone, or maybe making a phone call because you hadn't been seen, or an appointment had been cancelled, hadn't been rearranged, that's very difficult to do, because you feel that you're putting them out. And realistically, that's their job. And unless you make that phone call, there's 100 other people there that also need that appointment.
They're going to leave you on waiting list.
Absolutely, and you might fall through the cracks. So without making that phone call, or without standing up for yourself, you might be left in limbo. So that even making that phone call is self-advocacy, and is really important.
Definitely.
It's funny, because like I went through, I don't know if you had to deal with them, I presume you have, the HSC. Like, so I got, it was quite a, it was quite a battle.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like, I felt, I suppose, a bit better about myself when I did go through it,
Yeah.
To that point you're making about advocating on your own behalf. So if you have to deal with a state body or whatever it is, with the HSE in this case, and you're successful ultimately, because I know, like, listening to other people, I was going on, I'm not going to get this, this isn't going to work. But it did work. I did get what I was kind of looking for out of them. And it made life, I suppose, a certain amount easier. Like, it made me feel a little bit more, well, I have an injury that's taken seriously, I suppose,
And that's the thing, you have to go through the frustration, you have to go through the challenges and the difficult times to get out the other side. And I suppose through advocacy, or through making the phone calls, or through going through that journey, that's when the confidence is built, and that's when you kind of get in touch with your inner self, and you become happier because you've gone through those struggles, and I don't want to say I'm way happier now than I was before my stroke, because that's not entirely true, but I have a completely different outlook on life, and I'm more appreciative of life post-stroke than I was pre-stroke. And that's no bad thing either.
Yeah.
And that wraps up our discussion on advocacy. What a great discussion. What do you think, Rachel?
Absolutely, Shane. It's inspiring to witness the power of advocacy in driving positive change and building a more inclusive society for all.
Definitely. And thanks to our listeners. Thank you for joining us on this episode.
Don't forget to subscribe to the Headway Podcast for more thought-provoking conversations on social justice and empowerment.
And don't forget to connect with us on social media to share your thoughts, questions, and any experiences you have.
Join us next week for another enlightening episode. Until then, keep advocating and stand up for what you believe in with Headway.